Today we have a double seminar with two great speakers from Northeastern University. So I'm going to introduce the first speaker, Dr. Sarah Connell, who is Associate Director of the Women Writers Project at NU Lab for Digital Humanities and Computational Social Science at Northeastern University. Her research focuses on text encoding and computational text analysis, national identities in medieval and early modern literature, and pedagogies of digital scholarship. She's editor of the Women Writers in Context scholarly publication series and co-director of the Digital Integration Teaching Initiative at Northeastern. She has a very long list of achievements, which you'll find in the speaker bio of the seminar, but I won't take more time, and I'm be looking forward to this seminar, The Sciences About Me, Digital Methods for Investigating the Impacts of Early Modern Women in Scientific Discourse. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. All right, so I will share my screen. So thank you so much, Barbara. Thanks, Ellen, for co-presenting, and thanks all of you for being here today. I will just note that my slides are available at this link, which I also just dropped into the chat. Okay, so today I will be presenting on some recent research from the Women Writers Project, examining the impacts of women on the sciences in the 17th century. So this newest initiative is very much situated within the Women Writers Project's almost 4 decades of work on women's writing and electronic text encoding. So I'm going to begin with some of that context. Our flagship publication is Women Writers Online, a collection of 475 texts written, translated by or attributed to women, first published in print and in English between 1526 and 1850. And the aim of this collection is to make women's writing available for research and teaching, and to situate early women writers among each other. So we're really actively working to resist any representation of women as exceptions or isolated figures. And Women Writers Online is designed to make clear how deeply enmeshed women were in the written cultures of their times. So in support of this goal, we place a great deal of emphasis on contextualization, making it easy for readers to understand the historical and social environments of our authors. Thus, we publish the Women Writers in Context collection of scholarly essays, the Women Writers in Review collection of periodical reviews, the Women Writers Intertextual Networks interactive bibliography, and the WWP Lab of data sets, visualizations, and digital experimentations. And all of these resources together are designed to provide as many entry points as we can for the study of early women writers, and also to support intensive critical research into our texts and authors. And since the early days of the project, the Women Writers Project has been invested in exploring the ways that digital tools can forward our goals. In the late 80s and early 90s, that meant that we were one of the first adopters of the Text Encoding Initiative, a community and a markup language that takes seriously the idea that text can be modeled in ways that provide new insights into their contents and structures. In more recent years, we've been experimenting with text and network analysis. And we're particularly interested in studying the ways that the sort of intimate close reading necessary for the markup that we apply to our texts can complement and be complemented by that bird's eye view made possible through computational analysis. And so that leads us to the project I'll be discussing today, which uses both computational methods that operate across millions of words and the Women Writers Project's highly detailed and very lovingly applied TEI markup. So the first thing I want to point out is that this is very much a team effort. As you can see here, it's a collaboration between the Women Writers Project in Boston and the Polygraphs Project based at Northeastern University in London. And our hope is that we're going to bring greater visibility to the significant roles that women played in the development of sciences through the research that we're publishing, the data sets in corpora that we're sharing, and a public roundtable that we held last fall. And so all of our results thus far, including a video of that roundtable, are available at the link on this slide. All right, and for just one final piece of context, I will provide a bit of background on a key figure for the work that we're doing. Margaret Cavendish was an especially prominent woman in the early modern sciences, and as you can see here, she also happens to be quite well represented in Women Writers Online, 1.3 million words. I've included a quotation from one of Cavendish's early works to give you a sense of her interest in a broad range of scholarly studies. So here Cavendish depicts a chariot driven by ambition and curiosity, into which her speaker, a young lady, is borne by her doubts and her hopes to be placed with the sciences all around her, after which rhetoric gives her a bouquet of eloquence, and mathematics crowns her with truth, capital T. In addition to Cavendish, we are also adding several works by other women scientists, including Jane Squire, Sarah Trimmer, and Mary Somerville, and Women Writers Online already has works by Jane Sharp, Sarah Stone, and Anne Conway, among others. Today I'm going to be focusing on Cavendish, however, because of the breadth of her work and because her interactions with the Royal Society are a really illustrative example of how women writers have both intervened in and come into conflict with institutions of scientific hegemony. Okay, so a key question for this project is the methodological one. What computational methods can be usefully turned to big questions like how can we measure and understand the impacts that women had on the developing sciences in the watershed period of the 17th and 18th centuries? And so we've adopted a very broad spectrum approach to start. I'm not quite throwing spaghetti at the wall, but not that either. I'm going to briefly touch on a few strands of our work before diving into one particular method. So first, we're pairing network analysis with simulations of knowledge transfer. This work is being performed by the Polygraphs team in London. I'm excited to see a few of them today, and you can read more about it at this link. They've used data from the 6 Degrees of Francis Bacon project to map out the various networks of Cavendish in the Royal Society and to run simulations that test how long it takes a collection of individuals to arrive at a predefined truth. They've also tested counterfactuals, such as how knowledge transfer might have occurred if Cavendish were a member of the Royal Society. In another strand, we're developing methods for using TEI data in computational analysis. So the Women Writers Project has already published a set of routines that transform TEI files into plaintext corpora that have been optimized for text and network analysis. And so we're going to be adding 2 new routines for our repository. The first can extract bibliographic references that appear within selected textual features for co-citation network analysis. And that sort of very rough network graph you're seeing here is a proof of concept for analyzing Cavendish's works based on which ones she references in the same textual divisions. And we're now partnering with our Digital Scholarship Group Lab to develop an interactive interface for experimentation with this data. Secondly, we have a new routine for segmenting encoded text in preparation for topic modeling. So we're going to be able to rely on the document's own internal divisions rather than just raw word counts. Both these routines will be added to our GitHub repo later this year, and the results and data sets will be published on the WP Lab. One other strand of research I'll mention, with thanks to the excellent folks at the Data Sitters Club, is that we've begun tinkering with principal component analysis. So we've been working with the tutorial Heather Likes Principal Component Analysis, which I highly recommend. That uses Mark Algie Hewitt's typicality code to plot works in a corpus by how typical they are of the corpus as a whole. So what you're seeing here is a prototype visualization with preliminary data, but we're soon going to be able to share a whole set of interactive interfaces for experimenting with textual typicality across several relevant corpora. And I think even in this proof of concept, you can see that Cavendish's works tend to cohere by genre. So these are all her dramas on the left. And then up here, we have sort of philosophy and natural philosophy. Her commentaries and her fictional works are here in the middle. And then all the way down at the bottom, very distinct, is her one biography, The Life of Her Husband, William. And a thing to know about Cavendish is she very strongly defies generic convention. And her interests in science and natural philosophy are thoroughly enmeshed in all of her works, whether they're formally natural philosophy or not. So what's really interesting and exciting for us looking at these results is that the formal properties of her text are visible here, but they're not fully determinative. So our next phase is going to be looking at works like The Female Academy and the Orations of the Diverse Sorts, which are sort of occupying interesting spaces between the forms that Cavendish wrote in. Okay, so that was just a survey of some of the methods we're using, and the rest of my time I'll be talking about one final method for text analysis, word embeddings. So I'm going to share some of our results thus far, and then I'll show a few ways that anyone interested could try these methods out on their own. Word embedding models are a machine learning approach to studying relationships between words in large collections of texts. So what we're doing is training models that position words from a particular corpus in what is called vector space. And this gives us insights into which words are used in similar contexts within that corpus and helps us identify trajectories of relationships between words. Word embedding models do require large corpora for the training process. So at 1.3 million words, the Cavendish corpus is actually a little on the small side, and you do sometimes see that, but it does have enough words to provide, useful and interesting results. There are many different options for working with word embeddings. We're particularly using the word2vec algorithm developed with Ben Schmidt's R wrapper, but we also have resources for using Python instead, and I'll share those at the end of this talk. Okay, so this is a very rough impression of the spatiality at stake in these models. So what you're looking at is a two-dimensional representation of a word embedding model that's been trained on the corpus of the Cavendish texts and women writers online. These models actually have many, many more dimensions, so usually in the hundreds. So what this is basically doing is it's squashing our model flat so I can put it on a slide. Even in this severely reduced representation, you can still see some significant relationships between words in our Cavendish corpus. So here at the top, these are a few words from Cavendish's dramas. It's scene, enter, and exit. And then over here, we have a cluster with earth, air, fire, water, cold, heat, and light. And then over here, we have like brain, head, and eyes, and that's close to body, parts, spirit, mind, thoughts, and words. And so you can see how Cavendish is sort of associating these concepts. There are also some interesting pairs of words. So we've got wife and husband, pleasure and delight, women and men, and then over here, sensitive and rational, which are terms that Cavendish uses to describe matter. So we as human beings might commonsensically know that the word wife is closer to the word husband than it is to the word potato. But this method allows us to measure and to act on those proximities. And it's important to note that the proximities being detected here are not necessarily synonyms, but they're words that tend to be used in the same context. So for instance, enter and exit are actually antonyms, but they function in similar ways, so the model places them close together. Okay, to illustrate this point on proximity, I've pulled out a few clusters from the vector space model of the Cavendish corpus. The clustering algorithm at stake here is k-means, and I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A. But for our purposes today, what I want to do is use the clusters to show the kinds of lexical relationships that word embeddings make visible. So these are a handful of completely randomly selected clusters out of a set of 150. They don't give you a full picture of the Cavendish corpus, but they do show some of the things she's interested in. So for instance, this is all words related to weather and the natural world. Then here we have a bunch of words related to animals. I really like cluster 5, which is negative words like fools, foolish, ignorant, and mad. And then cluster 6 over here seems to be something related to fluid and fluid dynamics, with vapor, moisture, melt, extract, and ascends. So these are just 6 random clusters out of 150. And like that flattened visualization we just saw, it's another way of reducing the complexity of our model so we can kind of start to get our heads around it. But I do want to say that I did not cherry pick these for my talk. These are literally just the first 6 results I got when I ran that random selection code. And I've never run that same code in my Cavendish corpus without getting at least one cluster related to science and natural philosophy. Okay, so here's one more way to think about relationships between words in a corpus as made evident through word embeddings. These are the closest terms to the keyword science in our Cavendish model over here, and then in another model trained on what's called the super science corpus from the Visualizing English Print project. And they've published several really useful corpora based on the Text Creation Partnership texts. So super science has every text labeled as scientific from EBO TCP phases 1 and 2, ECHO TCP, and Evans TCP. It is a much, much larger corpus with 1,979 texts, and it has a broader chronology than Cavendish does, 1482 to 1710. So we need to be cautious, of course, in reading differences between these models because there is such a variation in the scope, size, and chronology. But still, this does let us ask how the association for terms like science in the Cavendish works might compare to the association in a corpus that can serve as a proxy for something like mainstream early modern scientific discourse. So in other work on this project, we're comparing Cavendish to texts by Royal Society authors, to another VEP corpus with works by big name scientific writers, to other early modern women writers, and a few more. So if you're looking at these results, the numbers reflect what is called cosine similarity. For our purposes, this is just a number that measures how close each term is to the input keyword. The higher the number is, the closer the two terms are. So I've pulled out just the 15 closest words because that's what would remain legible on the slide. It's an arbitrary cutoff. It's not any threshold for significance. So with all those caveats in mind, we can ask if there are relevant differences between the two models. So the super science model has a strong focus on words for related disciplines like philosophy, astrology, astronomy, and chemistry. And then there are also some terms related to scholarship generally, such as knowledge, speculation, learning, and art, and the latter two of which also appear on the Cavendish list. And then our Cavendish model has one related discipline, mathematics, but we also have a lot of what I think of as active terms, especially related to discovery and invention. So we have like invents, discoveries, inspiration, invent, and experiments. And I thought the two forms of the word terms there were interesting when one examines those in context, because so many of them occur in places where the self-taught Cavendish is either like begging her readers' understanding for any way she might be misusing scientific terms, or distinguishing between the mere knowledge of a discipline's terms and a true understanding of the field. So this does seem to suggest some ways that Cavendish's approach to writing about science might be distinctive from others of her time. And our next steps are to broaden our approach to more systematic and less impressionistic forms of comparison. We're also going to be returning to specific textual instances that produced our results to contextualize our findings, as we did looking at the context for the word terms. So here's where I kind of want to ask Barbara what you would prefer that I do, because I had planned to go and sort of show people how to download this, run it on their own, and run through a few kind of sample queries in RStudio. But I know we got sort of a late start, and I'm wondering if you'd rather I kind of like cut those 5 to 8 minutes and we can just go to Ellen, or if I should keep going.
I think it'd be great to hear the walkthrough, to be honest. If you can keep it concise, I think it will be a great added value. Thank you.
Okay, I will do my best. Okay, so I will quickly show you what this Word to Vet code looks like when you run it, and share some of the ways that anybody who's interested can try this out themselves. So your first try this at home option would be to download the resources the Women Writers Project has published for training and querying word embeddings using either Python or R. These are all on our GitHub, which is linked here, and there's very detailed documentation there on how to get started. If you download these, you're going to get something that looks like this. There's a project file to keep everything organized. There's a whole set of markdown files for various tasks, documentation, and then a set of sample files and models, and then an output folder for saving your results. These models take some time to train, sometimes a couple days, but the release does also include some demo models that we can use, including that Cavendish model we were just looking at. So the only modification in this folder to what you can get from GitHub is that I added just a demo file that only has the stuff I want to show you today. So if I go to RStudio, this is where I'll be running the code from. And again, I'll show you the the options for Python in a minute here. Okay, so I've already loaded in my packages. So my first step is just to read in that pre-trained model, which I can do with this code here. All right, so this is the code that you can use for that clustering. So now that the model is activated, even though it was trained earlier, we can query it anytime that we want to work with it. We just activate it again with that code. And then this is what will produce those clusters. And then this last line is just what pulls up the 10, in this case, 10 random ones for us to look at. So we have, here's like a nice medical one. This is related to the Civil Wars in the English Civil Wars in the 17th century. We have something related to eating. Here's one about colors. Here's kind of a, court pleasures sort of thing. And we can do this as many times as we like, and it gives us a nice way of seeing, disease. I love that. Here's like sort of relationships, especially kind of, it looks like Cavendishian relationships, and so on. So you can see the clusters sort of give you a sense of like the prominent discourses within a corpus. This code here will let us look at the closest terms. So here's philosophy rather than science. So we can see like theology is on here and a couple spellings, theological. We can also see some key terms from sort of major debates of the day, like experimental. There was a big debate about the value of experimental science. And then one thing that I really like about this approach is that you can use what's called vector math that will let you combine the contexts of multiple terms. So we can look at the vectors for science and philosophy together. And you can also use this kind of code to amplify particular semantic spaces for words that might have multiple meanings. So for instance, if you wanted to distinguish between like March as a month and March as a verb, and you can use vector math to subtract particular contexts and even to construct analogies. And you can just keep adding terms. So we can add sciences and see what results we get there. And what we can do is just keep adding terms together to build up a vector that's something like the language of scientific discussion in the early modern period. So one final thing I'll show you, because I do sometimes find these lists of word results kind of fatiguing, is that we can also visualize the results from our models. So this will build us another PCA graph, this time taking those 80 terms closest to science, sciences, and philosophy, and then plotting them according to their principal components. And so that's what this will get us here. And I'm not going to dive into this because I'm trying to be brief, but I'll just point out that a thing I found interesting is how much language about language there is at the bottom, by contrast with language about doing things at the top. There's some interesting sort of divisions on the right and left also about like, disciplines and ethics versus applied things, military, profitable. I love that profitable's on there. That's so Cavendish. Okay, so there is so much more that I wish I could show you, but if you're interested, you can check out, as I said, everything on GitHub. And to quickly wrap up, and it's important for us that people can access this sort of material without necessarily having to go learn R, for goodness sake. So there is an option for trying this on your own without any coding. We have some pre-trained models in a web interface that has a lot of documentation and learning resources, so you can experiment with these without needing to do any coding at all. Okay, so if any of this sounds intriguing to you, there's so many ways you can get involved with the Women Writers Project. We welcome all kinds of submissions to Women Writers in Context. We have a Teaching Partners program where you can share your teaching materials and reflections on them. We're, as I mentioned, going to be adding a lot to the WP Lab soon, but there's already some exciting stuff on there. We're always so delighted to share our data with researchers. And of course, we're also excited to receive suggestions. So that might be text that we should add to WWO, research avenues we should explore, resources we should publish. And that is it for me. Thank you so much, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This was brilliant.